Welcome one, welcome all. I hope everyone is doing well. Let's hope everything is set up correctly. And I have the sun blinding me already. Oh, and I turn the volume up rather than down. Great. Okay, cool. All right, so I hope everyone is doing well. Please say hello in the chat if you are here already. And I am going to sort out the lighting situation very quickly. Okay, boom. Hopefully that is all sorted now. Okay, cool. All right, so I hope everyone is doing well. Please say hello in the chat. Let's see who's watching. We have Antinatalism says just waves. Nag says misleading titles include reaction in the title. Maybe I'll include. I have considered including reaction in the title. I'll see, but I always link the if you know it's a reaction by always checking the description, seeing if there's an original video. Cool. Okay, cool. All right, so today we are going to be reacting to a debate or discussion that just happened. I have not watched it. It's fresh off the press. So I have no idea if it turns into a debate or if it remains just a discussion. But what we have is Amanda from the Exploring Antinatalism podcast is having a discussion slash debate on whether we should have kids with Travis Timmerman. I think I'm saying his second name right there. Now, Travis, I think, has been a guest on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. So they have a bit of history in terms of interacting with each other. I think they're somewhat familiar with each other. And there was an event that went on, which I can show you just here. So hopefully you can see that. So that is the poster for this event. They're called Talk and Taste. I had no idea what this event was before I heard about this one. So it's called Talk and Taste, and they hosted one on should we be having more kids, and it's a pronatalism versus antinatalism debate. Now, obviously, antinatalism. Amanda was arguing for the antinatalist side. Yeah, sorry, I was just configuring something in the background there. So Amanda was arguing for the antinatalist side, and Travis was the pronatalist side. Now, honestly, I cannot remember. I did listen to Travis's appearance on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast when it came out, but I do not remember what it was like. So I have no idea what sort of arguments or anything he uses. And it sounds like it was an interesting event. So basically, by the sounds of it, Amanda and Travis, they sort of give opening speeches. And then there are guests, I guess. And I assume there's like a meal, I'm guessing. And I think they did a vote before and a vote after, so you see how people shifted in their opinion throughout the debate, or once the debate has happened. So I don't know if there's any more to get into. It is a bit of a long one. It's an hour and 40 minutes, so we're going to be hunkering down. I don't know how official the recording was. It seems like the version we're going to be watching, which is the only version available, is from the Exploring Antinatalism channel. It looks like Amanda was sent like different types of recordings and she kind of stitched them together the best she could. But the audio is of different quality throughout the event, and there's video, then there is still images, and then there's video again. So yeah, we will have to do with what we've got. I'm sure they did their best on the day to get the recordings they can. And I think that's it. So we can go ahead. If you have not already, please say hello in the chat. We also have Etruska, we have Linda, we have Doverhoff. Welcome, everyone. Right, I think we can kick off then. So we have Olawale Blue Vegan as well. So, as always, I've downloaded it and boosted the volume. So let's
Hello. I'm noticing that people are really scared of us and are sequestering in the back. If you guys want to come a little.
Please let me know if the volume is okay. I'm thinking it's okay. I've got the video the stream open on my phone, and it sounds okay to me. But let's see. And you can see. So here's Travis. This is the host, who I don't know who she is. I'm not sure her name, but I know Tejas on Antinatalism this week had the host, whose name I forget, and Amanda on for a short interview about the event. So if you want to go and see a bit of behind the scenes, go and check out Tejas's latest Antinatalism this week. I think it's the latest one or the one before. And they have a short interview. And then obviously this is Amanda. And Amanda is sporting the Exploring Antinatalism podcast t-shirt.
Closer. Or not? Are you guys all shy?
I promise I don't bite.
Yeah, Amanda doesn't bite. All right. Where is Anthony?
Oh, that's easy.
Come on down, Anthony.
Are we maximized on that?
No.
Oh, so Linda is saying it's actually too loud. Can other people confirm if it's too loud? I can actually turn it down. Maybe I've gone overkill on the audio, but yeah, let me know if it's if more people think it's too loud. I can turn it down a bit.
That's okay. All right, you guys. Hi, I am Sadia. I'm the host of Talkin' Taste. Thank you. Yeah, so this is our third Talkin' Taste, but our first really big public event, and it's sold out. So I appreciate all of you guys coming here tonight on a Friday. If you guys brought drinks, now's the time to open your bottles and drink. We also have jungle juice in the back, if you guys remember that in college. I've already had a fair amount, so you guys.
I don't know what jungle juice refers to, but what it is reminding me of is when I was at university, what sometimes people would do at parties is they would have they would make a punch, and they would literally just have it in a massive plastic tub, and then you would go and fill up your cup from that, and it obviously would not be good quality punch. They would just buy the cheap shit and throw stuff together, and it was often horrendous. You could neck it to get drunk, but you'd be completely fucked, and it didn't taste amazingly nice. It sounds like that is what maybe she's referring to as jungle juice.
You guys are welcome to get drunk with me. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Talkin' Taste. It is an event where we debate kind of spicy, controversial topics. This one is definitely one and very topical. And we have two lovely guests, which I will introduce in a moment. But I'm going to pass it off to our lovely co-host, Anthony Green. Everyone give it up for Anthony. Okay. I don't know if that one works, so we'll just have to share.
Hello? I think this is working.
It's working, great.
I've been told to hold this just below my chin, but if my peas are popping, please let me know. Hello, everyone. We are here tonight to raise a question that we don't often raise in public, which is, should we have more babies? I'm sure that this is a topic that many of you have thought about in your private lives, but it's increasingly becoming a matter of public significance. On the one hand, there are those who worry about declining birth rates across the developed world. For instance, there are some estimates that say that South Korea is going to lose more than half of its population in the next 100 years. A lot of countries aren't far behind. On the other hand, there are those who worry about the effect of ballooning human populations on climate change. People ask questions like, is it moral to bring children into a world which we are rapidly making worse? And from a personal perspective, the issue is also becoming much more complicated. Women worry about political attacks on their reproductive autonomy. Prospective parents worry about the costs and time required to raise children, which seem to be rising faster than inflation and have for many decades, seemingly. There are many, many, many opinions on this topic, and if you've ever struggled with any of them, you are in very good company. We have brought you, primarily Sadia, two incredible thinkers who have agreed to represent both sides of this debate. If you've come confused, we hope that you leave confused, but confused at a higher level. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. There are two incredible thinkers. I'm going to start by introducing our representative from the Antinatalist camp, Amanda Sukanek. She is the host of a very popular YouTube series, the Exploring Antinatalism podcast, and co-author of Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption. Her books are fun if you guys want to check it out. She's actually flown all the way from Chicago, so welcome back to NYC because she is a New Yorker. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And to my right, we have our representative from the pronatalist camp, Travis Timmerman. He is the chair of the philosophy department at Seton Hall and co-author of Exploring the Philosophy of Death and Dying. Tonight, he'll be defending the pronatalist camp. Give it up for Travis. All right. So before we start, we have some ground rules. This is the topic, and I thought this was a great transition. Should we have more babies? Great title slide. So, more talking. One thing I want to know, this is a spicy topic, but it's definitely meant to be fun. Amanda and Travis are actually friends, and they've known each other before this whole event, so just know that it's not going to be they're not gonna chew each other out. The other thing is keep drinking. This is meant to be social, and I want you guys to get really shit-faced by the end of this. And we'll just get rowdy. The idea of this is that we're gonna listen into these lovely speakers and then have a little party after. And we want you guys to laugh. This is a really serious topic, but it doesn't mean it has to be handled in a serious way. And also bathrooms. Bathrooms are interesting. So there is a bathroom. It is to the right. There is a bubble of water on the ceiling that's about to burst. But if you guys are willing to take an adventure, please do. The toilets are working.
Obviously this is all preamble. I assume we're going to get into it soon. I didn't realize we've already been going 6 minutes. There's been 6 minutes of preamble. But I think soon what they'll do is they'll get into their opening pieces. And then I assume they have maybe a bit of back and forth, and then there's Q&A.
But it is the back to the right if you haven't seen it. All right. So I think I have all the things that I needed to say. The poll. So I want to take a poll of how you guys feel about the topic. I had a.
So this is interesting. They're going to do a poll. So what in the chat? What do you think the initial poll is going to be? I'm going to assume. I know that obviously the background population, antinatalists are a very small minority. But given an event like this is being put on, antinatalists are going to be disproportionately attracted to this event, right? Because this is a event that they particularly care about, or someone who's skeptical about procreation. So given that, I think that antinatalists, or those voting against like having more kids, I reckon maybe like 30%. I don't know if I'm being too ambitious. And then 70% probably, are either don't know or like are on the more pro-natalist side. Let me know in the chat what you guys think, but we'll see what the poll actually is.
Fancy live poll situation going, but it is so technical and not working. So I'm gonna ask you guys to scream. If you guys are in favor of yes, we should have more babies on the side of Travis, I want you guys to scream. Okay, let's remember the volume of that scream because we're gonna test that out at the end of this debate if your opinions have changed.
Okay, so we're not actually getting like a proper poll. So I've no idea if, I've no idea if we're actually gonna find out that if it's 30% or not.
Okay, now for the antinatalist side, if you guys are in the belief that no, we should not have more babies, I want to hear you guys scream. Oh, do we know who won that one?
I don't know.
Oh, wow, okay. I'm gonna say pro-natalist. You guys agree or no?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah, okay. My ears are saying pro-natalist. So let's remember that, and then at the end of the debate, we'll do another screaming match to see who won the argument. All right, so I have this fun graphic. Just thought it would be fun just to see them duke it out via PowerPoint. That's Amanda and Travis. And now we're gonna open the floor. So the way that tonight's gonna work is Amanda and Travis are gonna do opening statements, and then the rebuttals will happen where we're gonna ask them the hard questions. And you guys will also have an opportunity to ask some questions as well.
Okay, so here we go. Now we're getting into the opening argument. So I'm kind of interested to hear how Amanda frames things as well. Because I think Amanda will frame things slightly differently than if I was in her place and I was sort of making my opening statement. So I'm interested to hear how Amanda does things. And then I'm interested to hear what sort of arguments Travis is going to go for.
And then we will close off with closing arguments, and then you guys decide on the winner. Does that sound great? Okay, so we are going to start with Amanda. Amanda, I'm gonna ring the bell when it's close to time.
Okay.
But I know you have a long. Yeah, 2x, just kidding. Do you have a time? Does your phone
Would you
ring?
like me to?
Yes, that would be lovely. Okay. When Amanda,
Put it right close. Sorry, I'll just put it. It's fine.
we can, we'll stretch the time here. You can give it to me actually, because I have the, okay. All right, and ready?
Yes.
And go.
Thank you, Sadia. Please let me start off by saying what an honor it is for me to be here. I have this opportunity to speak with you all at Talk and Taste today at the magnificent Hancock Foundation, defending the position of antinatalism to you all, and my esteemed opponent for this evening, Professor Travis Timmerman. Thank you so much to everybody involved. We should not have kids because when we create new lives, we open those lives up to sentience, the possibility of harm, the inevitability of causing harm, suffering, unnecessary risk, and the certainty of dying. Before procreation, we simply do not exist. There is no one there. Procreation performs no rescue mission. Being born pulls no one out of a prior state where they were screaming out to exist, where they were in need of a good life, or to have positive experiences. Before we exist, there is no suffering, there is no death. None of those things exist until somebody decides for us that they have a justification worthy enough to take the entirely unnecessary risk of producing a life that might not be worth living. What does exist before...
Yes, I think that's one thing I would highlight as well, is that like this is completely unnecessary. Like, you don't need to be creating anyone, and there is no one in existence to want to come into existence, right? It's not like you're doing something in someone's interests or anything like that. Just to like get, because even though I think most of the people at this event probably don't think that, you know, we exist as some sort of ghost fetus or whatever beforehand, often people will talk as if we exist beforehand, in like subtle ways. So just to make it explicit straight off the bat, I think is a good thing. But let's see what else Amanda says.
Before we are born are the notions, addictions, and desires swimming around in the heads of those that create us. Ideas about what life is, what meaning they might derive for themselves by creating us, and imposing the same need for meaning onto us, about who we might be, their hopes for what our future might look like, indeed, if they're even thinking about any of those things at all. Sometimes procreation can indeed have the very best of intentions behind it. To some, they truly believe that by procreating they are giving a gift to their children, the gift of life. But in actual fact, those we create will not be us. They will be individuals, entirely new people, who may not like the world you've brought them into. They may see your gift as a curse. They may not accept this imposition of sentience and suffering.
Yeah, I think that's actually also a thing that people don't think is like, and I think I've asked a few people this when I've been doing outreach, is, you know, you've no idea the child you're going to create. What if you create someone like me, for example? If I'm talking to someone and say, what if you create someone like me? Like when you first saw me, you probably assumed I was just a regular person, blah, blah, blah. And in many respects, I am just like a regular person. But like, I am someone who doesn't think it's a good thing to come into existence. So, you know, it is completely plausible that you will create someone who may come to this conclusion, right? And they don't embrace the thing that you've done to them, right? A very grave thing you've done to them. Yeah, it's not the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome will be that they will be a pro-natalist just like their parent. But it's a possible outcome, and it's not like completely remote. And I don't think people really think about that. Just as much as they don't think about, you know, my child could be the one that gets cancer, even though that's much more likely. Like, you're much more likely to get cancer than be an antinatalist. But yeah, anyway.
What is music to your ears may be nails on a chalkboard to theirs. They may hate that your meaning had to be derived from their pain. They may hate it here. They may be miserable, and they may wish to die.
Although, I know obviously this is just one part of Amanda's intro. One thing I wouldn't do is and I'm not saying Amanda is necessarily doing this, but one thing I wouldn't do is put too much emphasis on, you know, they may hate this place sort of stuff. And because if you, I think appealing to risk is like a good thing, but you know, it's a completely valid argument. Like, I use the risk argument as well, and I'm trying to think how I can articulate what's in my head right now. But it seems to me that articulating the risks associated with procreation are probably better placed if it is a risk of some sort of extreme form of suffering, right? Like torture or brain cancer or something like that, rather than the risk of the child having particular sensitivities. Now, I know I just said that, like, if I speak to someone in the street, I may bring that sort of thing up. But that's not something like I would, like, you know, I don't think I'd preempt, like, is the correct word, like preemptively bring it up. I don't think that's something I would try and put into the argument I'm making. It would just be if it's specifically relevant, if they're saying like, their child will love life and stuff like that. Yeah, because the thing is like, yeah, I don't know how much I want to push that, but yeah, I'll have to think about it more and think why and try and understand why I think this. But when you're making it seems like appealing to the risk of your child having certain like viewpoints and stuff. No, I guess that is. Yeah, I'll have to think about it more, what I'm actually thinking, because I'm just fucking myself over right now.
How can this be ethical? How can we, without consent, and with lots of prior knowledge all around us regarding just how bad life can be, impose such extreme risks for the satisfaction of no real purpose other than the achievement of one's own selfish desires, life, onto the next unsuspecting generation? How can it possibly be ethical to create need for no need? Various flavors and whispers of this idea have existed throughout human history, but it had no name until very recently. We can find traces of this kind of thinking in ancient Greek philosophy, various Christian Gnostic sects like the Manichaeans, and by the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, all over the world, we began to see the advent of these ideas taking form within academic philosophy through such thinkers as Herman Vetter, Julio Cabrera, Mati Haira, and Karima Kerma. But in 2006, the idea finally crystallized into the form of a book called Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence by South African philosopher David Benatar. Amongst a host of extremely important advancements to the idea, at long last, Professor Benatar, along with Théophile Diderot, that same year, gave us the word that we now know and love for this concept today, antinatalism. Since that time, various forms of antinatalism, both academic and non-academic, have emerged, as well as the development of antinatalist art and activism.
So, this is interesting that Amanda's taking this approach. So it seems like Amanda is kind of taking this approach of trying to give a general... there's a difference between someone saying, give me an introduction to antinatalism and make the argument for antinatalism. Now, my understanding of this setting would be to make the argument for antinatalism, which I think is what Amanda has mainly been doing so far. But now she's sort of going more into talking about the sort of like the sort of history and the books and the people and stuff like that, rather than specifically just the argument to making the case for antinatalism. And I think that's obviously Amanda can take it however she wants, but it wouldn't, and this isn't even necessarily a criticism, I'm just saying I don't think I would have actually considered even doing that. Because antinatalism is such a fringe thing, I guess it's helpful for people that are coming along to this event and maybe haven't come across it before, and their interest has been piqued by the name of the event. I guess it is somewhat important to maybe give them a bit of the flavor of the history and the sort of relevant books and people and stuff like that, because then they have things to latch onto to go away if their interest is piqued and look into it more, rather than just specifically make the arguments. But that wouldn't have occurred to me. Like, I would have spent my whole opener just going through the arguments and trying to make a case, and maybe like preemptively sort of rebutting some of the potential pro-natalist arguments. Yeah, so it's interesting Amanda took that route, because I would have not gone into the history at all, but it's interesting to see that she chose to do that.
Since Benatar, the scope of what lives can have concern for antinatalists has also expanded, pushing far past only human lives, sometimes called anthropocentric antinatalism. But, and now it can exist for all sentient life, sometimes called sentient-centric antinatalism, and some even include the possibility of sentient machines, and further still. I think that it is very sad, it's a very sad circumstance when people don't get what they seem to want most out of life. And for some people, the most precious of things to be obtained, the thing that they cannot imagine securing a meaningful existence without, is to have children. And I sympathize, I really, really do. To spend one's life wanting children only for some creep to show up and tell them that it might be a very unethical
Keep going.
thing to do for them to happen, and that perhaps they should abstain from procreation for the sake of themselves and for the child, is loss. It is sacrifice, and there is real sadness and mourning attached to that. And even I, who am an extinctionist antinatalist, who never wanted children, who believes that no one should ever have children, and believes that no lives should be produced again, is no stranger to those feelings. Last paragraph. But it matters who we create, and it matters how they come to self-report on the quality of their lives. And if they come to write a negative product review of the gift of life that you've given them, if your gift turns out to be something that they desperately wish that they could return, if your unlicensed biological experiment starts to feel like Frankenstein's monster, then perhaps you were unjust in imposing and playing God in the first place. And now I do believe it's time to hear what Travis has to say.
All right, Travis, why should we have kids?
Should I just talk like this, or?
Oh, yeah, here we go.
What is-
You can take my mic.
I like having mic, so. I have 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Alright, so first, thanks to everyone for coming out. Thanks to Sadia for organizing this. Thanks to everyone that was involved in organizing this. And I'd like to thank Amanda. I'm defending what's going to be a fairly common, intuitive philosophical view that it's okay, indeed often good, to have children. But I don't think that is an easy thing to do, because a general feature of the way that philosophy works is things that seem very commonsensical, things that seem very obvious, upon reflection often turn out not to be, and in many cases turn out to be false. So this is a case where I think the common sense position stands up to scrutiny, but I do really appreciate people like Amanda holding our feet to the fire and making sure that we have good reasons to defend our view. So thank you for that. The case for antinatalism, I can already tell. What I'm going to say is not going to be as eloquent or energetic as anything that Amanda says. I'm more monotone. But the case, which fits the position that I'm going to give, the case for pronatalism, I think, is very simple. Lives that have net good in them, or more whatever you think is good, happiness, then bad, suffering, is good for the beings that live it. And if it's good for the beings that live it, I think that makes the world better. The more happy lives we have, overall happiness, the better the world is. The more net bad lives we have, the worse the world is. I think it's good to have children because in many cases, relative to our evidence, I think we can reasonably believe that the children that we create are going to have lives that are on the whole good, and I think that's going to make the world better, all else equal. Now, of course, there's a variety of complex situations that we're going to have to deal with, where I'm not going to be of the view that it's always, under any circumstance, permissible to have kids. But I also don't think even the strongest pronatalists are going to make take such a strong position.
Welcome everyone who has joined us on stream. Please say hello in the chat if you're watching and you haven't done already. Just to say hello to a few new people. We've got one more atheist. We've got Duz. Welcome Duz. Christopher Russell. Dr. Joe T. Velikovsky, PhD. AA, welcome. Who else have we got? Gia. Did I say Gia already? If not, welcome Gia. Welcome Lifestrike. Welcome Louis. Welcome TI. Welcome everyone. If you haven't said hello already, please do.
One last thing to say in favor of it is any sort of risk that you incur by having children, that Amanda just pointed out, I think there is a symmetrical risk in failing to have children. So you could, in having a child, you risk having somebody that is going to have a net bad life or cause somebody to come into existence maybe further down the line, generations later, that are going to have a net bad life. But in failing to have a kid, you incur a risk of failing to create somebody who would have had a net good life and would have made.
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with him. Like, there's a symmetrical risk there, right? But risk is it's used. I mean, I might be wrong about this, but I mean, it's used in the context of antinatalism, and I think it's generally used in within the context of something being bad. Like if there is a risk of something, generally the thing that there is a risk of is something negative, right? Because generally you're aiming towards the positive, or you're aiming towards the positive or something neutral, or just trying to do something that isn't negative, and there's a risk that something negative can come from it, or you won't get what you wanted, again, which is sort of a negative to you. So I agree with him that if you're using the term risk completely neutrally, then there is a risk that you haven't created someone who would have led a life that they would have enjoyed. But the thing is like, that seems like a weird use of the word risk if you don't think that someone has done something bad by not creating someone who would have had a good life, right? Like if you think, oh yeah, I could have created someone, and I could have created someone who would end up to have, a life that they enjoyed, but I didn't create anyone, so I don't know how their life would have been. If you think that not creating someone who would have had a life that they enjoyed is a bad thing, then I can understand, and you've done something wrong by doing that, then I can understand the use of the term risk. But that is a very strange view, at least in my eyes. Obviously, I'm going to say that because I'm an antinatalist, but that is an extreme, and I don't know, I would find it odd if Travis held that position, because then presumably you would be doing a bad thing, all else being equal, by not having as many kids as possible, which I don't think Travis I mean, I don't know, maybe Travis loads of kids. I don't know much about the guy, but he's not on my radar as someone who's like a rabid pronatalist, and he says that he's trying to defend a common sense view, and it's not the common sense view to say if you don't have a kid who would have had a good life, you've done something bad. So it's weird to use the label of risk there. If he viewed it as neutral, if you could have created someone who would have had a life that they enjoyed, but you didn't, you haven't, it would have been good if you would have been doing a sort of supererogatory good thing to create them, if you think that's a good thing. But if they'd have had a net positive life in his framing. But if you don't create them, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it would be very weird to use the word risk in that context. I don't know if I've just gone way too deep on his use of the term risk there. I probably have, but yeah, that seemed a very weird way of wording it to me. Who else have we got in the chat? We've also got Alden. Welcome, Alden. I hope you're doing well. Absolute legend, Alden. I don't know when you're next going to be in the UK, Alden, but I hope it's soon. Ragsy, welcome, Ragsy. Pigeons are a human's best friend. Welcome. I live in a flat, and I'm not on ground level, so I have pigeons flying around by my windows all the time. Alsgra, I hope I'm saying your name right. Welcome to the chat. Loon, welcome to the chat. And Evil Roy, welcome to the chat. Absolute legends.
The world better. Now, I don't think it's wrong to fail to have kids, but I do think that's a risk that you're taking that's going to detract from the overall value of the world.
Okay, so yeah, so he's using risk in a really weird way there, and also he's saying you're not doing something bad by failing to create someone who would have had a net positive life in his eyes, but you are detracting from the overall value of the world. Yeah, that feels like a weak way of saying someone is doing at least a small bad, or at least to say it would be better if they did this other thing, which I think would be still not a commonsensical view. Like, I think in my eyes, and again, maybe I'm out of touch, but I would say the common sense view, I guess it depends where you are, like the culture and stuff, but at least the common sense view in the UK would be, if you have a child and they have a good life, hunky dory, but that's not better than not creating someone. If you don't create someone, then they just don't exist. Like, it doesn't matter. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say that is a common sense view, but anyway, let's continue. I'm gonna try stop like nitpicking as much because I feel like I'm just going on tangents.
So when we're deciding whether to have kids, we're looking at the probabilities that they're going to make the world better or worse. And I just am of the view, for reasons that we're going to get into, that in most instances, many people are going to be able to have children and reasonably expect that they're going to be producing net good in doing so. I don't know how that was on time, but I think I came in under. So.
That was amazing, yeah. Woo!
I kind of feel like he didn't say that much. I know it was just the intro, but I also feel like, did he use the full 5 minutes there? It feels like a long time, but that's because I was rambling for so much of it. But I don't know if he actually, yeah.
All right, so we are now going to get to the meat of this, which is we'll ask some questions. We got some back and forth going on. So our first question, do you want me to ask both questions simultaneously, or?
Let's start with Travis.
Okay, Travis, you stated that you are on the pro-natalist side of things. In a perfect pro-natalist world, what does that world look like? You said, for instance, that there is, a risk in not creating life, that you might deprive someone that could have had a good existence of having that existence. Does that mean that there's an endless amount of population growth that we need? Are people required to have as many kids as possible? What is the perfect world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly not an endless population growth. There's going to be some capacity at which the world is going to get worse because life is not going to be sustainable on that. What that capacity is, I don't know, and it's probably a moving target because it's going to depend on a number of other variables, right? So
It'd be interesting. So it sounds like he's going to be answering this question more from a sort of pragmatic position, right? Of like, in the real world, how many, what's the sort of, for want of a better term, carrying capacity, but rather than environmentally, although that would be part of it, it would be carrying capacity in terms of like how many good lives can the world sort of cater for. It'd be interesting to hear his view on that, but also the more sort of like in principle version as well. Like if you remove the sort of constraining factors of, population density and etc., like, does he think that the world should have as many happy people in it as possible? That people should have as... I would assume in that case he would say, in that case, people should have as many children as they can cater for. But I want him to explain, because I don't know if he would say that people are sort of doing, people are doing a good thing by having as many children as they could cater for. And if they don't have as many children as they could cater for, they're sort of like, they're doing some sort of bad thing, or like at least in a sort of, in a weak sense. But I don't know. Yeah, I want him to kind of flesh out that a bit more about, our sort of personal obligations and what's good for us, whether, and like how that relates to what he was talking about, like bringing value into the world. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, my head's a bit all over the place.
Are we eating non-human animals that we're producing in factory farms in very carbon-intensive ways? If so, then that capacity is going to be much lower than if we're eating a plant-based diet. Are we expanding to other planets in ways that are habitable in the maybe not so distant future? If so, then maybe it'll be higher. actual physical size of people, what sorts of carbon intensive things do they do with their money, and what sorts of things do they not do. That's all going to affect how much life can be sustained on a planet. So no, definitely not endless. It would be optimal to get as close as you can to the limit without disastrous effects. But how close you get to the limit or what the limit is will be dependent on a variety of other factors. The perfect pronatalist world is not one that we live in, right? It's one, I think, where people have the ability to have children if they want to, and have the social and government infrastructure in place that would allow them to make that choice in the least risky way, right? So that's going to mean like access to hospitals that are well staffed with doctors that'll deliver, that'll provide them with the medical care that they need without risking incurring huge medical bills that could put them in debt for a long time depending on what their insurance situation is and what their out-of-pocket costs are. It means having access to mental health care when you risk postpartum depression. It means having access to childcare that's affordable. It means all of these things. And if we had that, which would be a huge sort of social change from what we have now, then we'd be in a place where people would want to increase their population, I think a non-trivial amount, and do so in a way that is a fully autonomous choice on their part.
I'm going to go off script. I do have a question.
Yeah.
Generally, right now, countries are all declining in population. And in that case, when you're saying that based off of the resources that we got to make sure that we have enough resources for everyone, isn't that a more positive outlook in having this declining population? Because right now, our hospitals are overrun. It's hard to like survive with a family at this rate. Is that a positive calculation in how we're managing population control?
Yeah, good question. So there's two things to say about it. First, the perfect pronatalist world is sort of thinking about like what's optimal and then how close could we get to that. We're not going to get there. And then we can ask a question about what we should do in light of where we are now and what's feasible to get to. So I was just outlining what the optimal case was. As far as population, my understanding is that birth rates have continued to decrease for roughly the last 20 years in the US, but the population of the US has continued to increase. It's just increasing at a smaller rate than it was. Why is it doing that? Am I not holding it close enough or too far away? I don't know.
You gotta pop your piece.
Yes, I gotta pop my peas. So my understanding is that the population of the US is increasing, but at a smaller rate than it was before, and the global population is increasing exponentially. Just in the last 200 years, we went from 1 billion people on Earth to 8 billion people on Earth, and that doesn't look like it's going to change. So it's a collective action problem for why we don't have the proper medical care for everybody who needs it. But we have the ability to do that. We have enough people, they could work together in the right sort of way to create this if they wanted to, but we need to have the proper incentives in order to make that happen. That's not going to happen, but it's worth thinking about what the optimal outcome is and then seeing how close we could get to that optimal outcome.
Got it. And Amanda,
Yes.
in a perfect anti-natalist world, what does that world look like? And do you want humans to go extinct?
Yes.
So I can give my answer to this first, and then we'll see how Amanda will answer. So I think I would say two things here. The first thing I would say is the perfect antinatalist world is going to look different to what any of us think is a perfect world. And the reason for that is because even an antinatalist world is not going to look perfect to, well, it depends how antinatalists understand an antinatalist world to be. But the way I understand an antinatalist world to be, it doesn't look like a perfect world, right? Because I'm an antinatalist, but I'm also other things, right? So I think maybe it was better for me to explain this the other way around. So the first thing maybe best to explain is like what I understand an antinatalist world to be. So if antinatalism is saying it's morally wrong to create sentient beings, then an antinatalist world looks like a world where that is not being done anymore by moral agents, who can be morally condemned for doing that. So essentially, humans are not creating each other anymore. We're not creating other animals like in farms and places like this. We're not going to be, creating sentient AI. Some people think that can't be done, but in case it can be done, this is not something we're going to pursue. Stuff like this, right? We are not going to be bringing sentient beings into existence. That will result in a world where there are still sentient beings, and there might still be sentient beings being brought into existence, but they will just be brought into existence by non-moral agents, like wild animals bringing each other into existence, for example, right? So that antinatalist world, it isn't a perfect world. In my eyes, a perfect world is a world with no sentient life. But that's not necessarily an antinatalist world, right? From the position we're at now. I mean, in some respect, in some respects, life is kind of like a sentient life is kind of like a Pandora's box. It's kind of been opened. Maybe someday, the universe will return to a state of not having any sentient life in it. I highly doubt humans are going to, play a significant role in that. So as far as human capacities are concerned, sentient life is like a Pandora's box. And antinatalism would seek to redress moral agents bringing sentient beings into existence. But like I said, that would still leave behind some sentient beings who are probably leaving very bad lives, right? And if you're getting really sci-fi, then humans could still remain and not go extinct, and seek life extension. And, if they're not vegan, then that is also something I would disagree with, right? So hopefully that kind of passes apart why an antinatalist world is not necessarily the same as a perfect world. I think if I was presenting it to this audience, I wouldn't go so in depth as I just did. I would be explaining more in plain language and just give like try and convey a simpler message. But I would try and reiterate that like an antinatalist world isn't necessarily a perfect world. Like I would still want other things to be changed, but this is what an antinatalist world would look like.
Sure. A perfect antinatalist world, by my estimation, would be a world in which no sentient life, or indeed any life at all, existed or had the potential to exist. Mars is currently.
Yeah, so actually maybe let me take back a bit of what I was saying. So like if we're talking about a perfect antinatalist world from scratch, I completely agree with Amanda. It's a universe with no sentient life.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the tip. We've just had a donation come through, and they haven't left their name, so I won't share their name, but thank you so much. You know who you are who just left that. No message, so nothing for me to read out, but thank you so much, absolute legend. You know who you are, and I know who you are. Sometimes when people don't leave messages, I don't exactly know where to go and what to say. Like, please, if you send a donation in, thank you so much for the support, but also, if you want to, obviously, you don't have to, but please do feel free to leave a message, say something, ask a question, whatever. But thank you so much to the person who just donated, absolute legend. But anyway, so going back to what I was saying, so I agree with Amanda. Like if we're talking purely abstractly, from the position of like constructing a world, an antinatalist world would just be, don't create the world, or if you do, it's just rocks. If we're talking about how we can reform the current world to be an antinatalist world, then that's where my current answer would come. My previous answer would come in. So yeah, it's a tricky question. Like if someone asked me, what is your perfect world? I would say a universe with no sentient life. Yeah. And we have Amanda in the chat, the Exploring Antinatalism podcast, says, "Hi Lawrence, thanks so much for watching and reviewing the video. I'm out of the house most of the day today, so I'm only just checking in here. And can't wait to watch the whole playthrough." Thank you so much for checking in, Amanda. Enjoy whatever you're doing out of the house, and yeah, catch up later, and let me know what you think. I'm sure you're going to be frustrated by my tangents that I go off on and nitpicking and areas where Amanda and I disagree, but we also agree. Yeah, it's all good fun. But anyway, I think I kind of lost where I was, but I think we are good to continue, so let's go.
A perfect antinatalist planet. Nothing is suffering, nothing is feeding off of one another, nothing is in need.
But the thing is as well is I think
world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the donation again. Again, they don't leave their name, but this is from the same person, Absolute Legend. Says, "When are you streaming with John again?" We have not. We'll be doing a part 2 to the Cosmic Skeptic David Benatar or Alex O'Connor David Benatar video reaction. We haven't booked it in yet. I'm not entirely sure. It'll be next time John is sort of around in my area. Which he seemed to think was had homoerotic undertones, but I still don't understand that joke. But anyway, so yeah, it'll be next time John is available to come and do it. And I don't know when that'll be, but I would expect in like the next few months, something like that. It probably won't be any time like soon. It's not going to be in the next couple of weeks or anything, but we will get to it, and you will be satisfied. Do not worry. But thank you so much again for the donation. The other thing I was just going to say was I actually think maybe for an audience like this, Amanda's answer is actually I think better when you're explaining. Like, if you want to get into the real sort of philosophical nitpicky stuff, then I would go with my answer that I just gave. But, like, giving an answer to that question, you want to give quite, like, a clear picture and try and essentially, the idea that, the fundamental idea that Amanda is trying to communicate is that sentience arising and coming into existence is a negative thing. It's a bad thing. And so a simple way to communicate that message in the form of an answer to this question is a universe with no sentient life. So I actually think Amanda's answer, whilst I think like philosophically I would like disagree and give a different answer, like the answer I gave before, I think her answer, for the purposes of the event and the context she's in, I actually think her answer is probably better. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue. Oh.
Nothing is being manipulated and nothing is in harm's way. Better still would be a world in which life had never arose in the first place. Before sentience, before DNA, an antinatalist may often see the emergence of these things as the first and greatest of tragedies on planet Earth. While the time in history we are currently living in right now may be a particularly bad time to have kids, it was in fact never a good time for life to arise on this planet, because suffering and the inability that life seems to have to be free of these negatives is unacceptable. The negatives are built down into the very core of what life itself is. To the second part of your question, yes, I do want humans to go extinct. In fact, I want the manufacturing, creation, birth, procreation, what have you, of all of life, particularly sentient life, to cease. But that is far easier said than done on a planet with an ever-increasing number of living things already on it, all which who possess autonomy and who find the idea of life ending to be abhorrent. For human beings, the problem is in relative terms is not really so difficult. People can be educated, reasoned with, and though it may take a great deal of time and may in fact be impossible, the task of the antinatalist is to somehow convince, speak to people, to the human race, to simply stop producing itself and to go quietly into that good night. The problem of extinctionist antinatalism starts to become a great deal more complicated when we start to consider sentiocentric antinatalism. Human beings create and cause immense suffering to billions of animals for the sake of our own pleasure, the greatest example of which is industrialized factory farming, something that I think Travis and I can both agree is one of the worst things on this planet that's ever existed. So it's not uncommon that antinatalists are vegan, are very passionate animal rights activists, and would be for the extinction of those species. Wild animals, however, are a far different circumstance for many antinatalists because we did not have a hand in creating them. And the debate on if the extinction of human beings means that we have extinctionist duties to either prevent or to end the lives of wild animals before the one animal on planet Earth who could do something about it ethically and peacefully is gone forever, is amongst one of the most hotly controversial subjects under the entire creed. Now, to be fair to the width and breadth of antinatalist thinking, not all antinatalists are extinctionists. Some, like the transhumanist antinatalist David Pierce, believe that extinctionist antinatalism will fail for a variety of reasons, and that we should instead be setting our sights towards bioengineering the human genome to eradicate suffering, thus creating gradients of bliss hitherto unknown, and therefore making procreation almost done, ethical and life worthy of continuing. I personally don't hold out much hope for this as a solution, and I still believe that even without suffering in Kantian terms, it would still be unethical to manipulate these new beings being produced. There are also others who believe in things like life extensionism. Perhaps we don't need to go extinct at all. Maybe we could just give Aubrey de Grey lots and lots of money, and he will figure out how to make us live forever, and in exchange, we just don't produce new people. Or perhaps we could all collectively enter a full immersion virtual reality.
Yeah, so I guess Amanda is now elaborating on the sort of stuff I was mentioning before, which is interesting. I didn't think she would sort of cover that stuff, but to be honest, I think the approach Amanda is taking here is to really try and give the audience a case for antinatalism, but also an introduction to the general topic. Like, for example, when she was doing the intro, you know, a bit of the history and stuff like that. But also, I think she's just trying to give people an understanding of, like, the array of perspectives within antinatalism, rather than making one specific case for antinatalism, which I think is, like, again, I think it's something that if I was doing the event, I would have like mentioned, but I wouldn't have done it as much as Amanda. And I'm not saying I would have been correct to do that, or it would have been better to do it my way. It's obviously just Amanda and I, you know, would have been thinking about this event in slightly different ways. But it's interesting that Amanda went this way, and I think it would probably provide for a. It depends on the person in the audience, I guess, but it probably provide for a more interesting listen to the audience, actually, to be honest, what Amanda's doing. Because rather than going deeper philosophically into the arguments, you're more giving a sort of surface overview, a broad overview of sort of trying to capture not everything in antinatalism, but quite a lot of it. Yeah, which is also interesting for me to listen to as well.
And we could just play the best video game ever for eternity, have all of our darkest desires satiated, and no one would need to be born then, at least nobody real. For me, I do believe that I will stick with extinctionism. Better to end the suffering as we know it than chance the horrors of making it worse, which I believe all of these other solutions have the potential to unfortunately cause.
So I'm going to actually reverse things. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up, and then I'm interested in your take. This is maybe phrased a little bit provocatively, but a lot of your argument relies on the risk of harm, or the risk of bringing people into bad lives. What's so bad about suffering? Just to give very briefly an intuition for this, I think a lot of people have known people in their lives who went through very hard lives, who nonetheless feel some sort of journey has been accomplished.
Yes.
There's a Frank Sinatra song, regrets I've had a few, but I did it my way. It's a very common type of human sentiment. People are proud of their scars. What is so bad about suffering that we have to avoid it?
Well, I think that as individuals, we can certainly accept our own suffering, right? Like we may come to experience certain things, they cause us great negativity, but we strive past that. We build something better towards it. We build character. But the fact of the matter, those that we create are not going to be us. They might not accept or have the same gumption to react to the suffering in the same way. What might give you strength, what might write a new chapter of greatness in your life might utterly destroy those that you create. So
I know Amanda hasn't finished here, but I think Amanda's answer is correct. I think the things she's saying are true. I would answer it in a slightly different way, and part of the way I'd answer it is the same way as Amanda. So I think one thing I would establish, I think there are kind of maybe 2 or 3 things to establish. The first is that there is a very big difference between once you exist, rationalizing suffering, trying to narrativize it into some sort of project of growth and stuff like this. There's like Amanda said, accepting suffering for yourself. There's a very big difference between that and imposing suffering on someone else and choosing for someone else to go through suffering. Those are 2 very, very different things. The second thing to say is that even if you can draw instrumental value from suffering, like the guy said, you feel like you've been on a journey and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that the suffering itself was good. It just means that the value you could extract from it instrumentally was beneficial to you. Maybe it gives you a sense of meaning or something like that. But if you could get that stuff without the suffering, that would clearly be better. And if someone were to say, oh, well, you can't get it without the suffering, first of all, that still doesn't mean that the suffering itself is good, but also that just goes to show how shit the situation is in when we come into existence. Some of the things that actually, to be honest, many of the things that we seek because they are of positive value, we cannot get without suffering. That's like a shitty situation to put someone into. You put them into a situation where they're vulnerable, they need certain things to be able to have a bearable life, and yet to get those certain things, some of them you have to suffer to get. That's just that's an awful sort of predicament to be in. But another thing is, even if you can get instrumental value from suffering, that's not a reason to create someone. That's not a reason to create someone else. Yes, it's good you can get instrumental value from the suffering that you will experience throughout your life, or you may experience throughout your life, but that's because you're here. That's of value to you.
We bring children in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the donation. I'm very quickly going to finish my thought because I know I will lose it, and then I will get to your donation, but thank you so much. And I've already lost where I was. No. Instrumental value, may be of value to you, but it's not of value to the person you're creating. You're creating someone so they can suffer to get instrumental value they only needed because you created them in the first place. It's absolutely bizarre. Yeah, I think that those are the sort of points that I would touch on. Anyway, let's quickly have a look at this donation. So, thank you so much for the donation. It says Bovine Bluestocking always leaves a message with her donation. How tedious! I wish she'd get a life. And now I can't remember what I was saying. Thank you so much for the donation. I am assuming it's okay to reveal this, but that was in fact by Bovine Bluestocking. So a bit of a jibe. Is that the right word? But a bit of a joke from her. Thank you so much, Bovine Bluestocking. Absolute legend as always. And yes, Bovine always takes the opportunity to leave a message, which is very much appreciated, even when it takes me a bit of time for the cogs to turn and understand them, like this one. But yeah, if anyone else today or whenever sends in a donation, please always use the opportunity to leave a message. But thank you so much, Bovine. And let's crack on. Where am I going? Here.
Suffering is, in very subjective terms, might be absolutely nothing for one individual. It might be everything to some other individual. And by not procreating, by not forcing somebody into existence, I'll say all this later, but you take the fail safe. Because yes, you may create that human being that will go on to greatness, that can overcome suffering, but you might be doing exactly the opposite. And what right do you have to play God in that sense?
On the same note, do you need a child's life to be more pleasure than pain for it to be worthwhile? And if a child's life is more pain than pleasure, is that child's life worth creating? Do we have a right to bring a child into a world that will cause them more suffering than pleasure?
Yeah, good question. So it doesn't need more pleasure than pain to be worthwhile. Because I understand worthwhile to be a broad concept. That could mean their life is good for them and their life is good for others. So people could have lives that contain a lot more suffering than pleasure. I'm not sure what the calculus per se Nelson Mandela was, but plausibly he suffered more than he got pleasure. And his life was still worthwhile because of the good that he did for other people. Yeah. But life does need more prudential good, to use a philosophical term, things that are good in itself for the person that's living it. It needs more prudential good than bad in order for that life to benefit.
There's a couple of things here. The first is what gives you the authority to decide that on behalf of the person you're creating? If we kind of remove ourselves from the philosophical abstract for a moment, and place ourselves in the real world, you're sort of facing down the decision as to whether to create someone or not. You have no idea if they are going to be that type of person, right? Those types of person are not common. You have no idea if the person you create is going to be one. But also, it's very odd in the real world to accept sacrifice on behalf of someone else, especially in a one-to-one circumstance, right? If you knew that you were going to create someone who would have, maybe a lot of bad in their life, but overall it was going to be of utility to a lot of people. And you decided on those grounds to create them. Surely you would have to accept in that case that you should hold the same standard for existing people. So if someone already exists, you're just walking down the street and you could do this, would it be acceptable for you to just point at someone and say, yeah, I'm just going to, that person over there, they should have a bunch of harm visited upon them, and this is going to bring some sort of, massive benefit to many other people. That just seems like, and you're not even introducing here like epistemological uncertainty, right? Like there's all this uncertainty as to whether this is actually going to translate. Like if you put someone through this suffering, is this actually going to translate to, them having the character that will bring about great goods for many other people? But also it just seems strange that you are sort of, giving yourself the authority to decide on behalf of someone else that they will go through great suffering so that it can bring some sort of value to society. I just, sometimes it's good to remove things from the philosophical discussion and actually think, in real terms, is that actually a decent thing to do to people? Are you able to be sort of judge, jury, executioner in that way? That just seems very indecent to me.
The person that's living it. If their life has more bad in it, things that are bad in and of themselves, whatever you think that amounts to, if it's pain, if it's desire, frustration, if it's failure, if it's enemies, if it's lack of accomplishment, whatever you think in and of itself makes life bad, if there's more of that than what's good, then that life is not going to be good for the being that's living it, in my view. But it could be worthwhile in other respects. What right do we have to create such lives? Well, if the life is good for the being that's living it, I think that's all else equal, morally permissible to do. It's good for them, it's going to make the world better.
I think one thing they kind of need to drill down on here and debate is whether lives can be worth starting for the being, because I think Travis is kind of assuming they are. He's referring to these net positive lives worth living and things like this. And that's something that needs to be contested, because implicit in that, or explicit in that, is that there are lives that are worth bringing into existence for the sake of the being. And that is something that is fundamentally questioned by antinatalism. So it's that's something that, they really need to hash out.
I don't think you need anything else to justify that beyond that sort of benefit. What about creating a life that's bad for the being living it, but maybe good for others? I think the justification for that would come from the good that the other people's interests mattered just as much. Everybody's interests matter the same way to the same degree. So if enough people have a sufficiently strong interest in a being coming into existence, I think it can be permissible to create such a being. But those will be, I think, primarily hypothetical cases. And the cases that we're dealing with are ones where we think quite reasonably that the being that's going to come into existence is going to have a net good life. They just can't consent to that life before they live it.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next question, and this one is for you, Travis. I'm really putting you in the hot seat. I'm going to get a little spicy here for a second, because this is a critical part of the pro-natalist argument right now in the world of Elon and J.D. Vance. The U.S. is currently averaging around 1.6 births per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. So Travis, if you were to throw on your Elon hat for a moment, can you unpack this argument a bit? He thinks that because of this, this is a major threat to civilization as we know it. And to even take it further, considering the U.S. is getting outpaced in birth rates by countries such as India and Africa, why should Americans care?
I know this is nitpicky, but Africa isn't a country. It's a continent. That's she's just lumped, how many countries are there in Africa? Quite a lot. She just lumped them all into one country, which is common. A lot of people in the West do that. But yeah, it's just reminder that Africa isn't a country.
What's really at stake here?
Yeah, so first, I'd never want to wear Elon's hat. Just want to be clear about that. So, yes, putting get in that mindset. It's true that if the population replacement rate continues to decline, if that happens worldwide, then you'll have fewer people that can work together to produce good, and then that can strain various things, including the economy. If the population gets increasingly older on average, which is happening in the US right now, because of the baby boomer generation, they were just much larger than a millennial, like me, even though I'm an old millennial, but still technically a millennial, and then generations that come after, as that replacement rate decreases, then the generation, even though our population in the US is getting larger, it's going to get older on average. And then if people retire and they're not in the workforce, that can put a strain on the economy, and that's going to change the incentive structure for people in all sorts of ways. So that could be bad, potentially bad. That's something that Elon Musk is worried about. As far as other countries having a higher population rate, I think one thing that is not a cause for concern in light of this is we could draw talent in from those countries by having incentives to get them to emigrate here and study here and take jobs here and do all sorts of things that would improve our country. That's not what they're in fact doing, but they could do that. And then the decreasing birth rate shouldn't be that much of a concern. He might have, to be maximally charitable, a concern about certain undemocratic countries gaining more power in the world, and then that could have a net bad effect. So there's no reason to be concerned about like Asian populations themselves getting larger, but if it's China getting larger and that's exerting a larger influence in the world, and they do things that exploit people in various ways, or they could team up with or form alliances with people like Trump who have authoritarian tendencies, that could be a really bad, that's not Elon Musk worried, but that could have a really bad effect in the world. But my view is that we shouldn't care about this at all, except insofar as it changes the overall net good. So, there's some people that Elon Musk hasn't said this, although he sort of alluded to things on Twitter. But there's people who like Elon Musk and sort of worship him, for lack of a better term, and their reasons are just like blatantly racist. They're concerned about their culture dying out in favor of some other culture that's foreign to them. And I just think that is a completely misguided and objectionable set of attitudes to have. We should only care about these demographics insofar as they change the overall net goodness of the world, which I just am going to cash out in terms of well-being. How many happy lives are there, human and...
I think there's some things I would quibble with him on there, but it's not really antinatalism related, so we'll keep going.
Non-human animal.
Amanda.
Yes.
So a lot of what you've talked about is about, the ethical risk of forcing an unborn creature into existence. But Travis raises an interesting question, which is that a lot of the structures that we rely on in society actually rely in many cases on births. We need the young to take care of the elderly, and it's possible that, for instance, if we stop having kids, like that last generation of humans are going to have pretty horrible lives as they work themselves until the end of their lives, and all these things that we take for granted, retirement, enjoying your life as it comes to a close, are just going to come to an end. How do you think about that with respect to your position that we should stop having kids?
Sure. Yeah, I will kind of jump ahead and read what I wrote in relation to another question that I think answers this pretty well. While I think that we should stop having children, I think that should be an eventual goal, not an immediate one. If humanity chooses antinatalism to be the future, ethical extinctionism, I believe, has to be a gradual course of action. This is not dissimilar to what David Benatar proposes as phased extinction.
Yeah, and just quickly on phased extinction. So the video I have coming out on Sunday, it's not like a mega deep dive into it, but one of the things it talks about is phased extinction. So look out for that video.
Under this plan, those that wish to keep having children may do so, and gradually the number of new lives would decrease and we would slowly go extinct. To stop, full stop, even though that's what I would prefer, even though, and even though doing so necessitates the creation of new lives, not allowing it to be done that way, not allowing for reproductive freedom would inevitably cause a lot of suffering. And if that can be avoided by going slowly, but I'm not using my, sorry, by allowing the final curtain to close at a more phased pace, then so be it. And in doing so, we could also have time to attend to what I feel to be our other responsibilities before we're gone, namely what is to be done about the existence of other sentient life forms. So if this was up to me, my vote would be on phased extinction. The end of humanity must be something carefully planned.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, you know, obviously the perfect thing would be, you know, we just have a hard stop and it all works out. But reality is messy. It won't all work out. You have to be pragmatic about things. Well, talking of pragmatism, none of this is actually gonna happen, you know, for pragmatism to come about. But if it were to happen, we would have to be pragmatic about it, and there would have to be some sort of careful consideration of a step down in procreation so that we can make accommodation final generation, because, you know, none of us chose to be here, but the final generation also didn't choose to be here, and they are going to get an unusually raw deal. And so, you know, we should, if we can make accommodations for them by drawing out the decline of humanity a bit, then I think that's probably the better thing to do. So yeah, but actually this might be an interesting thing to have a poll about. Let me create a poll and see. So I'm going to create a poll. And so we're going to vote what is better. So I've created a poll, and cool. So I've created a poll on the different forms of extinction: phased extinction or an immediate cease in reproduction, and vote on what you think would, you know, should be the one that is pursued. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about in philosophical terms. I mean, like, if you were to actually advocate which of these two would be pursued, and you could get humanity on board, which one would you go for? Now, obviously, phased extinction, that is like a kind of, it's kind of vague. You know, what do we mean by phased? Are we talking like one step, one extra generation, a couple of extra generations? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a 10% decline in each generation, or whatever? That stuff, you know, is stuff that and people would have to bicker over. But generally, phased extinction or immediate extinction, which one do you guys think would be better to pursue? So far, we've got 11 votes. There's 33 people watching, I think, at the moment. So if you're watching, get in the chat and vote. This is your reminder. If you are not watching with your eyes and only listening, get in the chat and vote on which you think would be the better one to pursue. And while you're doing that, we will continue for a bit.
Carefully orchestrated and carefully engineered so that it causes as little harm and suffering as possible as we decline. I think that antinatalism has a way of opening up wide a lot of the failures, these pre-existing social systems we have in place. We tell ourselves this lie that that we will have children and they'll take care of us when we're old, for instance. But that is so not the case. Nursing homes are filled with...
I have just realized I didn't switch the screen. So you're just watching me. Fucking hell.
People that have tons and tons of kids, and those kids may not have any contact with those parents. They don't care for those parents. Children are not the insurance end-of-life care plan that they're promised to be. And the idea that we should be producing children for this purpose.
Yeah, exactly. I think Amanda's going to get onto this. It's like there's no guarantee they're actually going to look after you, and also this is not how we should view other sentient beings.
This, in the first place, in my opinion, lays bare the fact that senior care is not well served and needs serious rethinking. And again, I think antinatalism.
Okay, so I'm going to close the poll. So the results are in. Are they in? I've closed the poll while it's not. Why is it not posting? Here we go. 57. So it was sort of near-ish. We had 14 votes overall, and phased extinction got around 60%. Immediate extinction got around 40%, which is interesting. So we've got a slight majority of pragmatists in the chat. But yeah, if you can, if you're able to, and you're interested enough to, or you have the willingness to, please share in the chat why you voted, what you did. It would be interesting to see people's thoughts.
Makes that even clearer, that fact even clearer. If Doge and the Trump administration does end up ending Social Security, for instance, I think the failure of some of these systems we currently have will be tested, and in assuredly catastrophic results will ensue. Many states in America
Fucking hell, I've done it again. There we go.
have filial laws, which means that seniors will, if they're no longer receiving their life-sustaining SSA checks every month, it will be the responsibility of their children to care for and support them, a burden that most don't want, can't take on emotionally, financially, what have you, and which should not be expected of them in the first place. So, yes, I think we produce a ton of lives. We have all this expectation that it's going to uphold the systems that we have in place. I don't think that works to begin with. And the fact of the matter is people are choosing to have less children. And so it should be a society that tries to acclimate to that rather than the other way around.
I guess the question, this is a follow-up. You're mentioning extinction. If everyone dies in the end, what purpose does that serve? Like, who are we serving if there's no one with sentience left?
Well, it feels like...
That's a strange question to say, who are we serving? I mean, in my eyes, the point of ceasing reproduction is not really to particularly serve anyone. It's more doing what you believe is the more ethical thing to do, which is not impose harm on anyone. So if you're going to ask, what are you doing this in service of? It is to not impose harm on people who you could have brought into existence. But to say that you are doing it to serve them is a very weird way of wording it. But yeah.
Like we're losing something, right? Because we're addicted to life. We're addicted to existence. We think we have this idea that this has to exist. We have to have new blockbuster films come out. We have to have new talking tastes. We have to have all these things. But in the fact of the matter is we don't. There is nothing that all of this actually serves. Especially particularly if you're an atheist, I mean, there's no greater purpose that the existence of any of this serves. So sentience, we know, causes a tremendous amount of suffering, and there's a mirage out there of taking these chances, taking these risks with producing suffering, that it might produce something good. That's gambling. That's gambling with somebody else's welfare for very little gain, in my opinion, for absolutely no reason, to serve no purpose, to serve no grander scheme than our selfish desires. So again, I think that what matters is that on our way down, if again we choose this as the future of humanity, that it be done in a way that it doesn't produce exponential suffering, doesn't make things worse. That's the real values of sentience, that it has to be, that it's this precious thing that we have to take care of. But does the world need it? Does anybody need it? We certainly don't start out that way, we don't need it before we exist, and there will be nothing that is crying out for it to exist again once we are inevitably gone. Because whether people choose antinatalism or not, extinction is inevitable. We will go extinct. This is all very temporary anyway. So.
Just one small point of order. I want to ask the audience their opinion on one statement made. Do we need more talking tastes?
Absolutely. Talking taste will exist in the universe, and that will be very important.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question to me at the center of all of this, is that whatever we think of the value of having kids, just like empirically, last 150 years, second people had the opportunity not to have infinite kids, they seem to have many fewer of them. Pretty much every place on Earth has a cratering birth rate. Even the places with high birth rates, the birth rate relative to what it was 30 years ago is cratering. You know, Nigeria, I think, went from like 14 to 5 or something in the last few decades. Don't quote me on those numbers. So, Travis, from your perspective, and I recognize this is a difficult question, but I'm interested in what you have to say. Why are women having fewer kids now? And what would encourage people, if you think they should be encouraged, to have more?
Yeah, so
I understand, obviously, this is their event. They run it how they like. But I would have liked the questions to Travis seem to often be quite like, you know, like, you know, empirical, logistical, stuff like this, you know. I would have, obviously this is just my preference, but like I would have been more interested for them to sort of pick up or ask questions about, you know, the sort of foundations of his beliefs about why we should be bringing people into existence and stuff like this, rather than these more sort of like society-based things of like, why are people having less children, or, you know, how can this work out and stuff like this.
it's a complex empirical question. There's some like general trends that you can point to. You mentioned 150 years ago, people had more children then because there were higher infant mortality rates and you needed to have kids to help out on the farm. And so that, you know, there wasn't as much access to healthcare. There were fewer people going to college. They were having kids earlier. There was a stronger social norm. I mean, there's just a series of complex social factors that make it the case that they were having more children then. That's different now. More people are going to college. They're waiting until they're older to have kids. The cost of having kids has increased. I think the social pressure to have kids has decreased, which is probably a good thing because that was putting pressure on people to have kids who didn't want to have kids. So that's just going to scratch the surface about why people are having fewer kids now. There's general demographic trends. When you see that countries get richer, people tend to have fewer kids. When they have access to education and birth control, they tend to have fewer kids. Not particularly surprising. Should we encourage them to have more kids?
Yes, insofar as it's going to make the world better, and then we can incentivize the people who want to do it.
So just so you know what's going on, the whole thing doesn't, there's not video for the whole thing. So Amanda's obviously just edited in some images to go with the audio. So that's what's going on.
To choose to do so of their own volition and make it as easy as possible for them to. All right. So there's a bunch of different ways that you could try to do that. There's a bunch of different ways to approach the situation. I'm not sure which one is the best, or which set of incentives is the best. But what I would want generally is for people to be informed about the relevant options and informed about the risks that they're taking, have those risks minimized, and then make it feasible for them to have kids if they want to, regardless of the financial situation, and then have it not be stigmatized to choose to refrain from having kids if they don't want to. And if we did that, I still think we could get the population increase that would make the world better than it would be otherwise, and then we would avoid the downsides of having to stigmatize people who just want to autonomously choose to not have kids. And that's, that should be totally fine.
Do you agree with the $5,000 tax credit that Trump has instituted?
Yeah, he floats a new idea every day. That one is something that other countries have done. Do I agree with it? I don't have the sort of knee-jerk disapproval of it that many of my fellow liberal friends seem to have. There's a sense in which I think there's not anything that's inherently objectionable about offering $5,000 tax credit for having kids. I think that's very unlikely to do much to move the needle in the number of people that are having kids in the US. If anything, it's sort of, for those who were refraining from doing it because they thought that the out-of-pocket medical cost would be a little bit too high for them to take on. $5,000 might put them over the edge to make that decision to do that. But whether I ultimately support it would depend on looking at the range of different proposals that are available and benefits and drawbacks of each of those. And I haven't done that. And I don't think Trump has done that either. Just floats a new thing out each day. That sort of sounds good on paper. But the short answer is I don't find that inherently objectionable. There could be a case for it that I think I would potentially support, but it would depend upon other options available to us.
Thank you very much. I'm actually just, regardless of whether you think it's good or bad,
Yeah.
Why do you think women aren't having as many kids?
It's a weird way to frame this question, right? Because, I assume people do this because obviously the statistics are births per woman. But this question of why are women having less children? It's not just women; it's people in general. It takes two people. I mean, I know obviously there's technology now where a woman can, get a sperm donor and then go and have a baby on her own. But most births are happening through, there's a couple that wants to have a child. Yeah, and I don't know. I just find the wording of the question of why are women having less children? It's just it's as if men don't exist. It's very bizarre.
Look, I think women want to be people, and they want lives of their own. They want all the same freedoms to explore and solve problems and to achieve the things that men have, and that's what we should be encouraging them to do, to live their lives to the fullest.
I don't know if they only advertise this in what do you call it, universities or whatever, but that is a super young audience. I don't think I see anyone there over the age of 40. Yeah.
There is every reason to give women the freedom to make procreative choices, all the choices. There is absolutely no reason to encourage women to have children. The world is teeming with lives in need of comfort and love, and it would be good if men and women were encouraged to serve the needs of those already here, as opposed to the creation of new lives. I think antinatalism as it exists today has, in large part, kind of been failing women because it's extremely male-dominated. The old saying is antinatalism is for boys and the child-free movement is for girls. And there's many reasons why that's kind of played out that way, which I won't get into now. But I think that there are very few there are very few women who are openly sort of vocal about this subject at all. There's only one antinatalist female philosopher, for instance, Patricia McCormack. And so I think that's left a rather huge gap. For many women, the ability to incubate a fetus is paramount to their identity of being a woman. And women's rights have been under attack for so long, and it's not hard. to see how women would be suspicious of a philosophy that is like mainly articulated by men, that espouses that this like wondrous womb thing may actually be pretty dangerous, and that pro-choice is actually always anti-choice from the perspective of the child being produced. This is very difficult messaging, and it's a real challenge for antinatalists to find a way of speaking to women on the subject in a way that is understandable and inoffensive. But let me just also say, I think that you're always on the right side of history to make it safe for women to have children if that's what they decide to do. Women should be given those choices, even though it takes all the choice away from the child being produced. But I don't think that that's what we should be encouraging women to do. I think we should be encouraging women to live their lives of their choosing. More than that, in this current political climate, just to answer sort of something about the $5,000 and whatever, I would be extremely suspicious of the motives behind anybody that is actively encouraging people to have children. Travis excluded, of course. Natalism is vulnerable right now. It is being wielded as a tool of nationalism and futurism. And again, I know that sounds very hyperbolic, but these people want you to pay for their administration in the flesh, blood, sweat, tears of your children, their labor. They don't want your children to have health care. They don't want your children to be well educated. They don't want your children necessarily have happy lives. They want a technocratic white ethno-state. And it's a party that very few of us are invited to, and it's a party that needs fresh, warm bodies to fund its existence. Don't let them have that satisfaction. Don't hand these people your children for the sake of their ill motives. Don't pay for their fun and your daughters and sons.
Woo! Well, Travis, on that note.
Just off the back of that, that sounds, what Amanda was just saying there sounds very similar to the French antinatalist from the 1800s, Marie Huyot, who she wrote a bunch about essentially using the rejection of birth as a way of protesting. She was protesting things like capitalism and war and things like this, but I'm sure it would also go for similar things to what Amanda was just talking about. Yeah, and it's very reminiscent of that, what Amanda was saying. This use of non-procreation as a means of protest. And if you want to hear more, a deep dive into Marie Yu and hear about all of what she did and her views, just type in Lawrence Anton Marie EU, as in MARIE space HUOT into YouTube, and my video on her will come up. Super interesting character and a lot of information in that video.
So I do encourage you to put on your Elon hat again. Just coming off the heels of what Amanda said, I'm just going to throw some stats on here. The suffering a mother endures after having children often extends far beyond the delivery room, shaping nearly every aspect of her life. Mental health challenges are widespread in the U.S. Just some stats. 1 in 5 mothers experience maternal mental health disorder, such as depression, anxiety, even psychosis. Globally, about 13% of women who have just given birth develop a mental disorder, with rates even higher in developing countries. Suicide and overdose are now leading causes of maternal death in the first year after childbirth. And beyond statistics, mothers often face relentless fatigue, guilt, anxiety, and a profound sense of isolation, sometimes struggling to bond with their babies or care for themselves, while societal expectations and lack of support can deepen their suffering. This is a very sad question. So the silent crisis underscores the immense, often invisible burden mothers carry throughout their lives after childbirth. Travis, I know this is a very loaded question, but I am interested in, like, if Elon was in the room with us, like, how do you justify promoting higher birth rates when it causes so much suffering to women? As the white male in the room.
Yes. I'm happy to speak to all these women's issues as the white male in the room. So I think there's a couple things to say. So, one thing is are we promoting higher birth rates with all of these other things health fixed? I wouldn't cash out my position in that way. I don't know how I'd cash out Elon Musk's position, but a reasonable person, and insofar as Elon Musk is reasonable about this thing, what one would want to say is what they're advocating for is higher birth rates in conjunction with changing these conditions to try to minimize that problem while providing that relevant information about the risk that's going to be incurred, because you're not going to be able to completely eradicate it. And then let people make informed choices about what they want to do in light of the realities of the situation that they find themselves in at that point. So you're not going to be able to probably not going to be able to completely eradicate the risk of postpartum depression, but you can take steps to minimize it. You can try to figure out how to treat it. You can try to make sure that people have access to mental health care, to a support network, to try to curb that problem, and then provide the most sort of like up-to-date relevant data to people when they're deciding whether they want to have kids themselves. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is anytime that we focus on risk, it's worth thinking about the things that we risk by failing to do that. And if we're producing lives that are on the whole net good, that make the world better, that has to be factored into the overall calculation about whether this is a policy that's worth pursuing, or whether, if you're talking about a couple deciding to have children, that this is a choice that's good for them to make. That has to be weighed against any sort of risk that they incur, which does fall disproportionately on the person that has to give birth.
But on that note, given the stats that I've listed out, it's clear that there is a lag, right? There's this world where women get all the support they need, men are equally involved, but that's not the world we live in, and maybe I'm being a pessimist. I don't foresee that happening in the next 5 years. If anything, it might get worse. So in that situation, like, is that convincing, or should we convince women to have more babies in the fact that systems aren't supporting her right now?
Yeah, so there's different levels at which we can talk about this. We can talk about what individuals should do, and then we can talk about what groups should do, and we can talk about what the policy should be, and we can talk about how to incentivize them. So the general policy that I favor is one that would allow people to make highly individualized choices given what's best for them and the expected goodness of having the kid in question. And that is, I think, feasible. It is feasible to get this information disseminated in the right sort of way so that people can think about the situation that they're in. I wouldn't want a blanket statement of like, women should have more children. That is the scope of that is far too much, and it would generate the sort of bad outcomes that you're pointing to with respect to that situation. But the policy of providing the relevant information to people to let them make decisions for themselves, they can then look at that and then assess the evidence and then decide whether that's a risk that they want to incur. So, I mean, this is something that my wife and I did when we decided to have a kid. We have a 2.5-year-old now, and this is something that we thought about for almost 20 years because we've been together for a very long time before we had a kid. So this is something that we took quite seriously. You can look at general statistics, but it would be too quick to infer from general statistics that that's your chance, right? You can look at sort of features that make people more or less likely to be susceptible to postpartum depression. You can look at family history. You can talk to your family about what they went through when they had kids. She can talk to her mother about that and her siblings, and then get a more fine-grained assess of risk there. She can take steps to try to mitigate those effects if it happens. She can, and in spite of that, she can and did decide that it was worth incurring that risk in order to have a kid for the good, she thought, of the kid, and for the overall good that it would prevent her, the joy of being a parent. positives and the downsides. So I don't know, I hope that I answered your question directly. And the point is, I wouldn't want to make a general policy blanket statement like that. I'd want some policy that's going to allow people to make fine-grained decisions in light of what's best for them.
I guess, and maybe I'm getting progressively more drunk. I guess the question I have for you then is, if you say for example for me,
Yeah.
if I had a high chance of suffering from postpartum depression,
Yeah.
my genetics tell me I'm going to be a very sad mother, and maybe my child will be really depressed too. Should I have a kid?
Well, I need to know more than that.
Okay.
So, in general, I think people that suffer from depression most likely have net positive lives.
Okay.
So I don't think that would provide reason for you, moral reason against having a kid. It would just be weaker moral reason to have the kid. If you think the depression is so bad.
That's wild to me that, like, you know, there was no one, and now you've created someone with depression, and that was worth doing. That it's just such a fundamentally different worldview. And yeah, I like, to some extent it almost feels futile trying to convince someone like that. You know, just as I'm sure he would feel it was futile to try and convince me to his side, because it's so different. You know, if you don't think depression is significant enough harm to not want to impose on someone, yeah, I just don't know. Even if you do think there is benefit in coming into existence, like, you know, you don't just get to impose stuff like that on people because you think they're going to benefit in some way. Or even if you know they're going to benefit in some way, like, who's given you the right to impose that on them because you think that they should be, you know, given something that you think is a benefit to them? Like Amanda said, like, they might not even want it, you know? Like, I have a pretty decent life, and like, yeah, by the standards of history, I probably have one of the best lives, you know, given that in most of history people didn't have running water, toilets, a fridge, stuff like this. And like, I can still realize it wasn't in you know, it wasn't advantageous to me to come into existence. I'm not better off as a result. Yeah, and like, just, you know, I don't know if this is not necessarily a knockdown point, but it's just something to consider, that like, if you are led by something which makes you willing to impose like depression on someone, you know, you like, be hesitant to actually act on that at the very least, you know. Yeah, it's just crazy to me.
The likelihood of that is so bad that the life is going to be on the whole negative, then I think that provides very strong moral reason for you to not have a child in that case. With respect to postpartum depression, want to know, like, how likely is it, and what form did it take, and what sorts of things you can one might be able to do to mitigate the effects of that? How long would it last? How much good do you think you would get from having a kid versus how much good you would get from doing the other things that you could do with the time and resources that it takes?
Like, just as an example, like, imagine, you know, if you broke someone's arm, and you knew like, as a result of breaking this person's arm, I know which hospital they're going to go to, and I know which nurse they're going to see, and, you know, they're going to, you know, like each other, and maybe for like a year they're going to have a sort of friends with benefit situation. So they're going to get, you know, they're going to get a load of shags in, and they're going to get a bunch of pleasure from that, you know, and in the long run they're not going to have any major sort of lasting pain from breaking their arm. You know, their arm will return to what it was before. So you know what, I've judged that it's worth it. I'm gonna go and break their arm, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna get their shags in, and I think it's gonna be worth it. This is ludicrous. Yes, like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't see why people feel like they have the authority to make that decision on behalf of someone else. But yeah,
to have and raise a child, and then I want you to be able, like for anybody, to decide what's best for you, and then act in light of that.
We have
Eric in the chat says, "I would consent to that. Please break my arm."
put Travis through a little bit of a ringer. So I don't know actually what the answer to this question is going to be from you, Amanda, but I believe you said that you were very in favor of the right to end one's own life, right?
Yes.
And a lot of what we've been talking about, some of Travis's arguments rely on this question of like, essentially, what is the individual's responsibility to others, you know?
Yeah.
Let's say there's a mother or a parent and they don't like their lives and their lives are suffering and they would like to take their own life. Do they have an obligation to their family not to?
Yeah, I mean, examples like that do give me a little bit of pause. I mean, I have to say. I mean, I absolutely believe in the right to not exist, but I also believe in the right to no longer exist. I do think that it should be seen as a human right to have access, reasonable access, given upon request for the right to end your life. Now, to be able to have the freedom to exercise that right without having some negative consequence on your loved ones, I mean, I sadly do think that might be asking a little too much of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think like all this sort of stuff is highly context dependent, highly individual. And, you know, you can't really speak much in broad strokes because, you know, it is so individual. But, you know, at the least we can say that if you have created someone, you know, so if you're someone who has children, that is, you know, you now have obligations to them. And if you end your life, you're not going to be able to service those obligations, to fulfill those obligations to them. And that is something you should do. You would be doing a bad thing by not fulfilling your obligations to those people. And they will be very strong obligations, right? You've created a vulnerable being. You need to look after them, at the very least until they're competent enough to look after themselves in a generally comprehensive way. And if you end your life before that point, then, you know, you're sort of selling that person short. But on the other hand, like, I'm very sympathetic. Like, none of us chose to be here. You know, if you get to the point where you decide for someone else that they have to be here, then I think you kind of, you know, you to some extent forfeit your entitlement to sort of lament about being here. But I think obviously, you know, you still can to some extent. But if you're in a situation where your life is shit enough that you're considering, you know, accessing assisted dying or euthanasia, then, you know, you do have obligations to other people, and you should, like, you know, you should, as much as you can, account for that in your decision. I don't know. It's very hard, you know. Like, I'm sympathetic to people that, you know, if they wanna end their lives and they are in real great strife. But I'm also sympathetic to, like, the children, right? Like, these people have, you know, consent. Like, they consented to bring the people didn't consent to come into existence, but they sort of consented to the obligation they're going to have to this person by creating that person. And you should fulfill that. You know, you should try your best to fulfill that. But at the same time, I'm not going to hold it against someone, you know, massively if they are in such a bad condition where it would be genuinely best for them to exit existence. It's a very tricky one. You know, it's highly individual. It's highly context dependent. Like, you know, it's very difficult to weigh the things up here. But yeah.
It's always going to hurt to lose people that you love. I've lost countless people to suicide. I know it sucks. It's awful. But continuing to live for those individuals was worse. And that to me is what matters, that they got to choose what they wished. I think what really sucks now is the circumstance that we have at the minute, that people that want to die have to either end their lives in secret, they're forced to choose methods that are not reliable, that end up doing great harm to them before they die. I've had lots of friends in that circumstance, unfortunately. It's absolutely awful. We don't give people the dignity of closing out their time on Earth by, having a party, saying goodbye to the people that they love, making arrangements. But you do have these circumstances, like you bring up, like the mother, like a parent and child, or perhaps like, in another extreme case, you have somebody that may have like a cure for cancer. Like, it's incredibly, it would be a tragedy if that person didn't fulfill that part of their destiny by giving us their solution before they ended their life. And I get that completely. I think what we have a responsibility, I think the responsibility that we have to people is to give people options and allow people to make a plan. I think that somebody in a circumstance of, like, whether they're a parent or whether there's some genius that has something that humanity needs, they should be able to say, I'm giving you this amount of time. If I can give it, and then beyond that, I gotta go. I can't stay here because people didn't ask to be here in the first place. I do think that the responsibilities that they incur while living, it's not like those mean nothing. But I think that society has to have the correct amount of compassion to, one, allow those people to make real end-of-life plans while also allowing people through that plan for the end of their life to make arrangements. That's one of the other things that is denied to us when we are denied the right to die, is that, if you're a parent and you gotta go, right now that kid is just going to be, there's no plan. There's no ability to make a plan. They're either going to throw you in a mental institution or you're going to die in a closet, or like, I'm sorry to make a joke out of it. It's not funny, but it is really the circumstance that we're in right now. So I just think that this needs to be a much more open conversation. We need people to be able to make arrangements so that their loved ones do receive the care, even if it doesn't come from them. And I think we have to let people go, because right now what we do is endless amounts of suffering, endless amounts of therapy and fixing, and there's never just like a no mas point where like we let them go. And we need that. People need that, in my opinion.
Thank you, Amanda. Mm-hmm. So we are gonna have one more question, then we're opening it up to the audience. Travis, you have a 2-year-old, and you mentioned that it took a bit of time to make the decision to have a child. I guess I would love to know what your perspective is in actually deciding, yes, I do want a kid, and how that kind of was informed by your outlook in the future and where life is at right now. Any sort of detail around what went into your personal decision making.
Yeah, sure. So there was a lot. Part of it was concerns about whether there is more reason to adopt a kid who already exists and give them a good life rather than create new life. And for a while I thought that there was. But now that I think if you just produce more happiness, then it's okay either way to do either thing. It might even make the world better to create an extra happy kid if the child that is not adopted still has a net positive life.
That's such a strange concept to me, because like, I don't understand what it means to make the world better in this abstract way, you know? Like, you've created someone who's happy, but the only reason they need happiness is because they exist in the first place. You know, there was no need, there's not this sort of, you know, counter out there in the universe of like, you know, this is how much happiness is in the universe. If it goes up, it's better. If it, you know, like, it's just a bizarre way of seeing the world to me. There was a video made a while ago by a channel called The Graphene Rule, I think, who doesn't make videos anymore, but made really good, you know, concise videos on veganism and antinatalism. And one of the thought experiments they used, or one of the sort of analogies they used, was saying, you know, to create someone and make the world a better place with them being happy is like trying to make bike riding safer by not getting bike riders to wear helmets, but recruiting more bike riders to then get them to wear helmets. And that's a bizarre state of affairs. Like, yeah, it makes sense. If someone's already riding a bike, get them to wear a helmet. That's going to make them safer. That's going to benefit them. But it's not a benefit to someone to wear a bike helmet if the avenue by which they are wearing a bike helmet is you recruited them to cycle to wear the bike helmet in the first place. You might as well have just not recruited them to cycle. They were in no need of this bike helmet beforehand. It was of no benefit to them. The only reason it's a benefit to them is because you got them to ride a bike in the first place. Yeah, it makes no sense to me. But yeah, very different worldviews.
Considerations of...
And I don't know who the person is who... if anyone knows that channel, The Graphene Rule, please say in the chat, 'cause I'd be interested to know if people also know that channel. I have no idea who the guy was who ran it. I know that he was English because of his accent, but yeah. And I remember commenting below one of his videos a while ago, and he said that he wasn't going to be making any more, which is unfortunate. They were really good videos. I don't know if he watches my channel, is ever going to watch this. If you do, please, you know, make some more videos or reach out to me, because it'd be really interesting to engage with you and maybe get you on for an interview. But yeah, I have no idea what this guy is doing now, but those were some very interesting videos.
My and my partner's career. We wanted to be able to have our careers. We wanted to be able to go to college. We wanted to be able to be financially prepared to have a kid. And I live in New York, and taking care of our kid right now is $50,000 a year, which is a lot of money for me anyway, because I'm a philosopher and they don't pay very well. So, like, we wanted to be prepared for that. We wanted to think about the other things that we could use that money on, and the cost of properly taking care of a child while being able to keep your careers is so enormous that money could be used to do other things that would also be very good and probably produce much more good in the world. You could save many more lives with that money than you could by spending it on your own children, which gave us significant pause. You know, questions about the way that the world is going was something that we thought about. I actually don't think there's much to that worry, but we were talking about the effects of global warming and geopolitics and how that might shape the world that our child would grow up in, and trying to make sure that, at least relative to our evidence, she would likely have a net positive life, which I still think was the case when we decided to have her.
Thank you. And now for Amanda. I know you are very much deep in the antinatalist community, and if anything, a leading voice in the movement, I would say. What kinds of experiences have shaped you and your colleagues' worldview?
Yes. So first off, let me say that antinatalists are no monolith. What might compel one antinatalist to start thinking this way is not at all the same that might move another. Antinatalists have been shaped by many different things in the past, present, and many things now are shaping antinatalists of the future. Personally, I never wanted children. I wanted to be myself. I had a mostly very happy childhood, a mostly very happy life. I was born here in New York on Long Island in Manhasset. My mother was a psychoanalyst and my father was an advertiser and oil painter. On the outside, particularly through my early childhood, I was a very cute, creative, emotionally precocious, blue-eyed, blonde hair. My hair's brown now, but I was blonde as a child. Little girl. But inside, I was always under a certain amount of duress. And this stemmed from several dimensions. The first thing was the idea that life could be or become something awful, not worth living, not worth starting, was never far away from my reality. My mother's side of my family is Armenian, and my father's side was Jewish. So I had genocide on both sides of my family. I grew up hearing stories like how my maternal great-grandmother, little Nena, who was alive until I was about 7 or 8, actually, she had to pretend she was dead in a pit of corpses for days in order to avoid herself being murdered by Turkish soldiers. And I looked at my then blonde hair and my blue eyes, and I knew that, like, Armenians didn't usually have those kinds of features. Nobody in my family had them. Nobody on my father's side of the family had them. So was I a product of some past rape, invasion? Did it take suffering and death to create me? Questions like that weighed very heavily on my mind. And I was often plagued by like a reoccurring dream about a museum of war, which contained truths about reality so unspeakable that a strong gust of horror would blow anyone out the front door that even tried to enter. The second defining feature of my pre-antinatalism is that as far as back as I can remember, I have been genderqueer. And there is a certain amount of conditional antinatalist thinking attached to those feelings, at least there were for me. Why was I born like this? Why don't I have that? Why wasn't I born? Why aren't I the person that I think I'm supposed to be? And then it wasn't until I got older that I realized, of course, that there was a far more important question to be asked, and that was, of course, why be born at all? And I realized that that's what I was trying to ask all along, actually. So to work through these ideas and feelings as a far younger person, my way of dealing with it was to become obsessed with deformity and horror and monsters. And some of my most beloved characters at the time, the Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, all seemed to be making some kind of negative comment about procreation. Eric, the Phantom of the Opera, with his birth lamentation, and Frankenstein, who the doctor should not have created. These all seem to be saying something very negative about creating lives. But antinatal thoughts and feelings are generally not ones encouraged in children, particularly little girls. And as an ever-fattening, genderqueer, dyscalculic, who was obsessed with action figures and monsters and comic books, I had already picked a lot of fights and battles, so I did my best to suppress those notions. By 2010, I was 27 years old, and I had already been making YouTube videos for a few years. I was a Dragon Ball Z toy reviewer at the time, and I thank you, and I pretty much by accident discovered people talking about antinatalism around that time on YouTube, and the effect was like being struck by lightning. This was the subject that I had been waiting my entire life to find, and for the last 15 years, I have dedicated myself professionally, creatively, and academically to pursuing and contributing to the development of antinatalism in whatever way I can, through comedy, through sculpture, through filmmaking, through writing, podcasting, drawing, animation, you name it, everything but dance. I am dedicated to trying to communicate that the idea that we cannot do anything substantial about the existence of suffering is a lie. We can stop buying it. We can stop trying to give it to each other as some sort of gift, and we can end it gracefully and forever.
Questions to ask? Yes.
Yeah. So this question is directed to Amanda. Yeah. I've never heard of the term antinatalism until today. So a lot of these ideas I have right now are very half-baked. But I wanted to ask this question from the standpoint of if I were trying to adopt your beliefs. Like if I were trying to just learn from you. The first thing that comes to mind is, for a great way to defend your position would be if there was a hypothetical world where the suicide rate was 50%. Like most, you're bringing in life into the world, and most of that life is choosing to end itself. Like that seems like it would be a world that we wouldn't want to live in. That sentience, maybe we would want to cease all sentience to exist. But then it got me thinking okay, well, actually the number of suicides in the U.S. is, and I looked this up, it's 50,000 in the U.S., right? And then coincidentally, we also have 50,000 U.S. vehicular deaths caused by cars. So then I wonder, could you make if I were to present to you a vehicular anti-natalist movement,
Yeah.
We should actually, the execs at Ford and the people on the assembly line shouldn't be making cars because that's creating that, we're just worse off. That's causing the same number of deaths, suicides. How would you respond to that argument? Is that,
Sure.
should cars cease to exist?
Well,
Yeah, so the way I would approach this is that, once we're here, as a matter of practicality, to be able to function as individuals in the society that we happen to be in, there has to be, sadly, an acceptance of some level of harm you're going to do, or risk of harm that you're going to do. Now, if we can make adjustments to society that will avoid harm, there's going to be a certain level of sort of harm that we can expect to come from the society, from the way we've organized it. And if we can organize it in a slightly different way, reform how we organize society so that it lessens that sort of baseline level of harm, then that's going to be a reasonable thing to do. And we can also act in ways as individuals where we avoid imposing harm on others as well. But the fact that we are going to cause some harm as individuals that exist is just another reason to be an antinatalist, because you're then not going to create someone who is going to cause that level of harm. And yeah, that is this idea of, driving cars and causing harm and death with driving cars. That can be part, it would be a weird aspect to focus on, but it would be part of a general argument for antinatalism that includes the misanthropic argument, the argument that if you create someone, they're going to cause some level of harm. But the general argument for antinatalism is very different from an argument for the use of cars. So when you're deciding whether to create someone or not, right, this is a decision you're directly taking for one specific individual who will exist. That you don't know exactly how their life is going to go, and so you don't know exactly how much harm they are going to suffer, but you can basically guarantee it's going to be a significant amount of harm that you are imposing on a specific individual that they have not consented to. Now, yeah, it's unfortunate that our society is set up in a way where, or just existence is such a way that we are going to some extent, cause harm to others. But the situation you're faced with when you decide whether you are going to drive a car or not is very different to the situation that, as to whether you know, are you going to create a child or not. You know, when you decide whether or not to drive a car, you know, there's no like there's no specific individuals that you know, there's not like a specific individual that is being pointed to and saying, if you drive a car, this is a person that you will harm. You know, there's no guarantee there. I guess there is like some sort of low level guarantee of harm, in that, you know, you're causing emissions and this is going to go and generally contribute to climate change and things like this. But obviously, like, your contribution as an individual is going to be very small, and like you've got to be able to function as a human being. You've got to be able to at least make these sort of trade-offs with, you know, there's some sort of level of harm that I'm going to be imposing, but I've just got to do that as a matter of being able to function as an individual and pursue my basic interests. You know, it's not a matter of pursuing basic interests in terms of like interest in terms of being able to function as a human being to create a child. If you want to raise a child, you can adopt someone, or if you want to care for someone, you can satiate that in other ways, like completely reasonable other ways. But yeah, creating someone is imposing a significant amount of harm without consent on an identifiable individual, and driving a car is just like, is not at all analogous to that. Anyway, let's continue.
Well, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. I mean, listen, I think cars, there are a lot of things that we produce that have a...
It's like, just as a matter of analogy, it would be like saying, you know, well, we have outlawed murder because, you know, murder kills people and it causes harm. You know, but so does driving a car, that kills people and causes harm. Should we outlaw cars as well on the same basis? Like, no, you know, they're very different actions. You know, one is unintentional killing, you know, and if you've got to do it as a matter of practicality. This other instance, you know, like if you're killing someone for fun, like, you know, they're very different situations. You know, you're killing someone, identifiable individual that you are doing a significant amount of harm to, and your interest in having fun can be satiated in other ways that are completely benign. You should not be imposing that level of harm on a specific individual to pursue your interest in having fun. You know, you can get your rocks off another way, just like you can get your rocks off for caring for someone a different way and not creating someone.
Realistic utility. We need cars. Like, that's just something that modern life dictates, and it does come with risks attached to it. People do die in vehicular manslaughter, and it's horrible. So I would certainly say we should make cars as safe as possible. Don't buy from Elon Musk, that kind of thing. But I mean, I think that there are, you know, we have to cut food with knives. I mean, there's a lot of knife deaths. So there's all kinds of things that do serve real utility for humanity, and those things are created for a purpose and they fill a need. I don't think that children fill those same needs. They don't have the same sort of necessity attached to them. And, you know, as far as suicide rates, I mean, I think that I am of the belief that our numbers on these things are a little bit skewed, right? Because we don't have the right to die. So this is 50,000 people in such dire straits that they're tragically, you know, put in a position where they have to end themselves in really quite horrific ways. They don't have access to euthanasia. You can't just go to, you know, if I need my appendix taken out, I can go to a doctor. Well, if I can afford a doctor, I could go to a doctor and have that done. But if I need to die, I'm like left with a rusty spoon or something in order to do it. So, you know, and I don't. If we had the right to die, I don't necessarily know that you would have this like rush of people wanting to end their lives, but what I do think is that you would have people that all of a sudden had the freedom to plan for their entire life, not just this period of life in which, you know, they're young, they're addicted, their life is reasonably good, it's something that they can count on, reasonably so. So I think having that freedom would change the game. And incidentally, if we were given that right, I think procreators would have some piece of an argument. They've at least created the fail-safe. They've at least created a world in which they're producing children and those children have an ability to escape through relatively quote-unquote safe, kind means. The downside of that is you'd be producing a child that might want to die, and why would you do that? Why would you impose that risk? So I don't know if that answered your question. I so hope that it did, but I'm happy to keep going. Thank you.
In the back?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I think we can all agree that a world with less suffering is better, and that we should all try to optimize for.
The woman who's asking this question is really quiet. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it, so I will repeat it. So far she's just said, I think we can all agree that a world with less suffering is better.
Less suffering, but I guess I'm questioning why antinatalism is the best vehicle for that enterprise, in the sense that.
And she's asking, but she's wondering why antinatalism would be the best way to get to a world with less suffering.
It's presuming that there is knowledge of what non-being truly entails, and we don't have any way of knowing what true oblivion or non-being is, such that we know that it is intrinsically better than being, which is a blend. Like, there's a scenario where non-being is an abomination.
And the way she's coming from this is basically saying we don't know what non-being is like, you know, so like not existing could actually be much worse than existing. So if we were antinatalist and we're not creating people, then they could all exist as like ghost fetuses somewhere and be having an awful time.
You know, that puts modern live suffering like far beyond our wildest imagination, and that living is the only relief from this you know, crazy non-being world. So I guess the question is, why are we focusing on antinatalism as the vehicle for wanting to reduce suffering versus some other kind of concepts like ethical altruism?
Well,
yeah, so she's basically just saying, like, if you want to reduce suffering, why are you focusing on antinatalism and not other things? Like, I think she said ethical altruism. My answer to that question would just be do both, you know? Like, if you don't create someone, there's no one to exist to come to harm, and then those who do exist, you can work to mitigate their harm.
Thank you for your question. I do believe, well, you know, a tremendous amount of contemporary antinatalism does come from a place of atheism, right? So the ideas about non-existence, the afterlife, I mean, these just don't exist. That's not to say that antinatalism has not been articulated from far more religious, perspectives. And actually, there's quite a considerable amount of research, evidence to support that those do exist, and there's a lot of research gaps, that I think need to be filled. But I mean, early Christianity, the Gnostics had huge pieces of antinatalist thinking within them. So I mean, I do think there is some crossover between people adopting a similar view that might also believe that there may be some limbo out there where, the non-existent are screaming to get in here, or there's something after death. Personally, I don't hold any of those views. But look, I think that there will be a future, right? And there's all of these competing philosophies about what that future is going to be. So antinatalism is one of the ideas that's in that marketplace of possible futurisms. And then you have, I named some of them, like there really are some people who want us all to immigrate into a virtual reality. And there really are some people who want, insane life extension. Insane meaning like forever life extension. And there are long-termists, and there are Curtis Yarvins and Elon Musk's and J.D. Vance who, want these ethno states and whatnot. And I think what antinatalism, the reason why I hitched my horse to it, is because I think that even a miserable antinatalist world, which I sincerely hope is not what it ends up being, has the possibility of causing the least amount of suffering of all of these other possible futures gone wrong. The failure of some of these other competing philosophies is so tremendous. And next to antinatalism, which I believe is perfect prevention, it is the fail-safe, it is the only way that you are, by reasonable standards, able to say, I will not create suffering and death. At least it also ends. It has an end point. It doesn't have this forever point where everything, like if we took the David Pierce route where we re-engineered the human genome to eradicate suffering. I mean, the chances of that going catastrophically wrong and not creating, gradients of bliss hitherto unknown and creating gradients of suffering hitherto unknown terrify me beyond all measure. So again, I think that we should consider all of the possibilities, but I think that there's a very strong argument to make that antinatalism is the one futurism with the least, with the smallest blood footprint.
We have time for one more. Oh my God, too many. Who can raise it higher? You can go.
So you both have talked a lot about utilitarian arguments for your side. Utilitarian being in a minimization of suffering. I think we could probably spend all day debating the minutia of what angle of suffering minimization works the best. I wanted to set that aside also because you both fell back on your personal experience to sort of justify this utilitarian argument, which I think adds subjectivity to that side. So for both of you, what are the best non-utilitarian arguments for what you support?
Keep the response tight.
As quickly as possible. It's a good question. I don't think that I presuppose utilitarianism. I'm not actually a utilitarian myself for a variety of increasingly boring technical reasons. I think the best argument for my position that doesn't assume any normative ethical view is just an axiology that says lives that are worth living make the world better, lives that are not worth living make the world worse, all else equal. The more good lives you have, the better the world is. The more bad lives you have, the worse the world is.
Is that so utilitarian?
Oh, so maybe we're using the terms differently, but as I understand it, utilitarianism is the view that you're morally obligated to bring about the best outcome, where that is cashed out in terms of whatever produces the greatest amount of well-being. And I don't want to say that. There are people who have that view, and then you pair it with the claim that I just made, and then you get the verdict that people are obligated to have children, that they're doing something wrong if they fail to have children. The strongest pronatal arguments, I think, are utilitarian in that way. And I want to disassociate from that and say that it makes the world better, but in my view, it's permissible to fail to have children, even if it means the world is comparably worse than it would otherwise be. That's as quick as I can be about that.
That was great, Travis. That was great.
It was a good technical question.
Yeah, that was good.
Do you want me to answer that
Yeah.
as quick as possible?
Yeah.
So, sorry, yeah. So I think that the position that you're describing is negative utilitarianism. I am a negative utilitarian. Interestingly enough, antinatalism academically has not generally been articulated through negative utilitarianism or utilitarianism. It is most often articulated through deontology. As far as I know, the world has not actually given rise to a virtue ethicist antinatalist. I don't know if it's possible. It might be. Who knows? But yeah, I would consider myself a negative utilitarian. I think outside of academic circles, that is generally the most common normative view to take with antinatalism, but your question had to do with if you didn't put the value on suffering, right?
Yeah, what argument would you make outside of that?
I'm guessing it would be consent. That would be more deontological. Could you say the risk argument as well is, not necessarily like you? I mean, none of the core argument. I mean, yeah, I would say none of the core arguments are necessarily utilitarian. I mean, they can all be made from a place of utilitarianism, but they don't have to be. Like the axiological asymmetry, that's a matter of axiology. And then, thinking that it's wrong to impose significant harm on others. Consent is consent. Risk, again, I'm not sure if that has to come from a place of utilitarianism. Yeah, so I think they can all be cashed out in utilitarian ways, but they don't have to be.
Yeah, then it would be sort of more about manipulation. I mean, that's just like Julio Cabrera is like probably the most famous Kantian antinatalist. He's a Brazilian philosopher, and so his arguments generally have to do, like, he's famously anti-abortion. He's an antinatalist who's anti-abortion because you are manipulating that being, you're manipulating that life, and he doesn't think that you have a right to do that. That's in stark contrast with like a negative utilitarian antinatalist. So it basically the will of one over the other, whether it produces suffering or not. And that can have some very interesting, that can actually widen the scope of antinatalism to insentience in various respects too, as opposed to just arguments about hands off of sentience. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so we're going to get off this fire graphic, and we're going to move on to closing arguments. So a lot of us in the room, maybe, are on the fence about having kids. And you guys are on either side of the argument, right? And I know, Travis, you've done a bit of work to figure out.
I believe we have Giovanni in the chat, just became a member of the channel. Absolute legend. Welcome, Giovanni. Top lad for becoming a member. If everything works correctly, that should get you access to the supporter community on Discord. And we have an event coming up this Sunday, which you're very welcome to attend. And we'll be talking about antinatalism and the non-identity problem. So if anyone wants to join that event or generally become a supporter, you can either join the channel as a member or click the link in the description and support me on Ko-fi or Ko-fi, and you'll get access to the supporter community, and you can attend those events. So that'll be very cool. But thank you so much, Giovanni, absolute legend. Cool, let's go. There's about 10 minutes left.
Whether you want kids or not.
And it looks like it's going to be closing statements.
More importantly, from your perspective, Travis, why should people in the room lean on, yes, I should have kids?
Well, I don't know if they should lean on yes, right? So I don't want to tell anybody that they should have kids if they don't want to. What I want them to lean on is looking at all of the options available to you. So not just that of having kids and what that would look like for you, to the best of your ability. That's hard often to figure out, but you can approximate it. But all the other things you could do instead of having kids. And for many people, they will be happy or happier if they choose not to have kids. And for many people, I think they'll be plausibly happier if they have kids. And if enough people did that, I still think for a variety of reasons that are difficult to change about the way that our society is structured and sort of maybe evolutionary pressures that give people a desire to have kids, we would still have a lot of people making the choice fully informed or as much as possible to choose to have kids. So what you should do is talk to other people that have kids and ask them to tell you the truth about it. Make it clear that you're not going to stigmatize them if they tell you that they don't think it's a good idea. I had a philosophy professor as an undergrad. He was a logic professor, had nothing to do with fatalism. And I was sitting in his office and he just came from time with his kids and he just asked me, I'm like 19 years old, do you want to have kids? And I was like, I don't know, maybe someday, a long time from now. And he said very casually, I love my kids, but if I could go back, I wouldn't do it. And I think that would rub a lot of people the wrong way, but I appreciated the candor and I was very interested in that. And I asked him why that, and he just said, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of money, it's a lot of stress, there's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make. I love them deeply, but it detracted from how good his life was for him overall. Produced a net benefit because they had good lives, presumably. As good a life as you can have by being raised by a logic professor, but still, a good life. So you should look at those options. You should look at the realistic cost of having a kid, giving them the life that you want to have. You should look at one of the things that I didn't mention earlier was like the risks of having a kid and how that affects based on age. So like, since my partner and I waited so long, she was a geriatric pregnancy, which just means being over 35. It's not that old, but that's what that category is. So there's increased risks that you incur if you choose to try to have a child at that time. So in general, look at all the information available, talk to people that have had it, talk to people who you trust to give you an honest assessment of what it's like to have kids, and then decide if you want to do it. And if you do, great, I think it'll make the world better. If you don't, that's totally fine too.
Same question to you. If someone's on the fence, why should they lean on having no kids?
Thank you, Sadia. Okay, first off, I want to say a huge thank you to our audience for listening to what both Travis and I have had to say tonight. Having children is a deeply emotional and personal decision, and antinatalism for many can be an extremely world-upending concept with an unthinkable one to consider. So once again, really, truly, thank you to everybody for listening to both of us. In the book, you can find here, that I recently co-authored with the wonderful Finnish philosopher and bioethicist Matti Haira. We speak at length about a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. In this story, Omelas is the shining city on the hill, a perfect paradise in which everyone has plenty and everything is wonderful for all, except that in some lonely cellar living in filth and misery is one tormented child whose tortured existence is the necessary price that must be paid for everybody else's happiness. In our world, no one's happiness exists in a vacuum. The happiness of some always exists along with the misery of others, and no one needed either reality prior to being born. Even if all goes well, and your child is one of the lucky ones to live within the shining city and have it all, what about their children and their children's children? What joy could possibly be worth being responsible for the eventual child in the cellar paying the price? An antinatalist is the one who walked away from Omelas. Antinatalism is, as I've said before, the fail-safe. It is the Hippocratic Oath. It is the one way that you can truly assure that you will cause no harm. Your child will not suffer. Your child will not cause suffering. Your child will not want. Your child will not need. They will not die because they will not exist. Live your lives, but do not force anyone else to live one.
So again, I had a lovely poll. Technical difficulties unfortunately occurred. So we're gonna have to do screaming again. Okay, so on the question of whether we should have babies, if the folks agree with Travis, yes, we should have more babies, please scream. Okay.
That sounds like louder than at the start.
Okay. All right, and for those who believe no, we should not have more babies, please scream.
That also sounds loud, and it sounded.
Wait, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Please raise your hand if you began this debate either undecided or on Travis's side, if you were one of those people and you did not change your opinion, please lower your hand.
Wait, can you say that again?
If you started undecided or on Travis's side and you are no longer there, please raise your hand.
You were convinced.
You were convinced. If you were convinced
By Amanda.
by Amanda.
Sam.
Yeah. Okay. If you were convinced, if you did not start with Travis,
Okay.
and you were convinced by Travis, please raise your hand. All right. We changed no one's mind. Oh, it was 2-2.
2-2. You guys did so well.
There's two people either way.
Okay. Well, the winner is both of you guys. This guy, yeah. I'm gonna do a shameless plug to our lovely
Cool. I think that is probably the end. So that was Amanda's appearance on Talk and Taste, debating Travis Timmerman about whether we should have kids. So my general feel is that I feel like that the event was very different from how I thought it was going to be. So it focused much more on the personal side of things and the sort of societal side of things rather than the sort of moral, ethical side of things. That element was mentioned, but it wasn't as prominent as I thought it was going to be. And if I was in Amanda's place, I would have prepared much more for that to be the main point of discussion. But having said that, I still enjoyed listening. I thought Amanda presented a more comprehensive understanding of antinatalism than I would have in terms of how antinatalism exists in the world and is understood by different people. And the only thing I'd say on Travis is just I found it frustrating that none of the people there dove into asking, why is coming into existence a benefit and this sort of thing. Because that would have been, it would have been interesting to hear his view on that. Him and Amanda might have gone into that on his episode of Exploring Antinatalism. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen to it. But that's what I'd have liked to seen more of. But I hope everyone enjoyed watching. Let me know in the comments once the live stream has finished. Comment below and share what you thought of the event and both sides. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope I didn't ramble too much and go off on tangents. I felt like my mind was a bit scattered today. I think that is everything. New video coming out on Sunday, so look out for that. I don't think I have any other updates. There's plenty that I'm working on, but nothing else to update on now. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and I will catch everyone in the next one.